Mary Ann Cotton. In the coal towns of northeast England in the 1860s and 70s, death kept a schedule at the houses of a respectable nurse and housekeeper named Mary Ann Cotton. Husbands sickened and died, 3 of them, with a 4th escaping only because she moved on first. Children sickened and died. Stepchildren, a lodger, her own mother, one after another across 2 decades and a dozen addresses, each move a fresh town where no one knew how often this had happened before, and at nearly every deathbed stood Mary Ann, competent and composed, and at nearly every funeral stood an insurance payout, small, regular, and in her name. Gastric fever, the doctors wrote, again and again, because that is what dying of arsenic looks like, and because no doctor of the era could imagine the alternative standing in front of him in an apron. She was finally caught in 1872, when she complained to a parish official that her healthy young stepson Charles was a burden on her, remarking that he would soon go the way of the rest of the family, and then he did, within days. The official went to the police, the boy's remains went to a chemist, and the arsenic was found at last. Estimates place her death toll around 21, which would make her among the most prolific killers in British history, and yet she is barely remembered, beside the infamous men who killed a fraction of that number. At her trial, the defense argued the boy might have inhaled arsenic from the green dye of the household wallpaper, a real hazard of the era and a measure of how hard the court reached for any explanation other than the woman in the dock. The jury declined the wallpaper. She was hanged in 1873, and exhumations and records have tied her to poisonings across 2 decades. The children of the region skipped rope to a rhyme about her for a century afterward, which is its own kind of memory, a nursery song where a case file should have been. Belle Gunness. In the early 1900s, a widowed Norwegian immigrant ran a farm outside LaPorte, Indiana, and placed matrimonial advertisements in Midwestern newspapers. Belle Gunness described herself honestly enough, a comely widow with a fine property, seeking a good man with capital to consolidate their fortunes, and she added one instruction that should be taught in every criminology course: triflers need not apply. Men came, carrying their savings, one after another, and wrote excited letters home, and then the letters stopped. Asked about them, Belle would say the gentleman had moved on. In April 1908, the farmhouse burned to the ground, and in the ashes lay the bodies of her children, and a headless woman the coroner could not confidently identify. One suitor, Andrew Helgalian, had emptied his bank account in South Dakota and traveled to the farm with the letters still in his coat, letters in which Belle had written that he must tell no one he was coming. When his brother Aslay arrived in LaPorte, demanding a real search, diggers turned over the hog pen, and the farm gave up its ledger, Andrew among the remains of at least 11 people, most of them suitors who had answered the advertisements, and estimates of the full toll run far higher. The headless woman, many investigators concluded, was not Belle at all but a final victim staged in her place, and sightings of the vanished widow were reported for decades. Whatever the truth of her end, the mechanism of her career is the point of her story. Every man who boarded a train to LaPorte with his life savings had run the calculation of danger, a lone woman, a farm, a marriage, and concluded there was none. The trap was not the farm. The trap was the assumption. Aileen Wuornos. In 1989 and 1990, men's bodies began appearing along the highways of Central Florida, shot, robbed, left in woods and scrapyards, 7 of them inside a year. Investigators built their theories the way the textbooks instructed, and the textbook said the shooter would be a man. While the profile hunted him, the actual shooter kept moving down the shoulder of the interstate with her thumb out. It took a witnessed car crash in a victim's vehicle, belongings pawned under an alias, and a fingerprint to lead detectives somewhere no profile had pointed, to a 34-year-old drifter and roadside sex worker named Aileen Wuornos, who had been hitchhiking the same highways her victims drove. She was arrested in a biker bar in January 1991, and detectives closed the case the old-fashioned way, locating her former girlfriend and letting recorded phone calls draw out the admissions, Wuornos confessing in the end largely, she said, to protect the one person she loved. Her case detonated into the spectacle it has remained ever since. Films, documentaries, an opera, a Hollywood Oscar. Underneath the spectacle sat 2 uncomfortable truths that the sober version of her story has to hold at once. Wuornos claimed self-defense, and her life had been a catalogue of abandonment and abuse, so unrelenting that the claim could never be entirely dismissed, and the evidence showed a progression: robbery, escalation, a gun used earlier and more readily each time, that no self-defense account could cover. Florida executed her in October 2002, by which point she had fired her appeals and asked for the end herself. She remains the case that forced American law enforcement to admit in public what the files had quietly shown for a century: that the phrase serial killer had been defined by the killers investigators expected, not the ones who existed. Juana Barraza. Between the late 1990s and 2006, someone was murdering elderly women in Mexico City, dozens of them, strangled in their homes, and the police hunt for the killer, the press called the Mata Viejitas, the little old lady killer, became a study in the power of a wrong assumption. Witnesses described a stocky figure in women's clothing leaving the scenes, over and over, consistently. Investigators concluded, formally and publicly, that they were hunting a man disguised as a woman, and the theory hardened into policy, with police at one point detaining and humiliating dozens of trans women in sweeps that produced nothing, because the entire premise was wrong. The stocky figure in women's clothing was a woman. On January 25, 2006, a tenant returning home found her elderly landlady dead and a stocky woman hurrying from the building, and police caught her at the scene. Juana Barraza was a professional wrestler who had performed in the masked circuits of Lucha Libre as the Lady of Silence, a middle-aged mother whose own childhood had been an unbroken record of abandonment and abuse at the hands of the mother who gave her away, and she had been posing as a government nurse or social worker, clipboard in hand, to talk her way into the homes of trusting elderly women. Prints and evidence connected her to a string of the murders, and in 2008, a court sentenced her to over 750 years, a number Mexican law renders symbolic, and the public understood perfectly. Investigators believe the full series may number more than 40 victims, grandmothers living alone in a city of millions. For years, every officer in the capital had walked past the actual description, because the actual description was unthinkable. The Lady of Silence was exactly what the witnesses had said she was. It was the police who could not hear it. A nurse, a bride, a hitchhiker, a wrestler, 4 countries' worth of case files spanning 130 years, and one shared alibi better than any lawyer ever born: the belief that women do not do this. Researchers who study female serial killers find the same patterns in case after case: quieter methods, poison and staging over blood, victims drawn from their own homes and their own care, money more often than thrill, and careers that run on average years longer than men's before anyone suspects, precisely because no one is looking. The profile is not protection. It is a blind spot with a body count, and every woman in this video operated inside it until the evidence became impossible, which took 20 years, 20 victims, or 700 years of sentence to say out loud.